Greetings! Today marks 2 months since I've started working on my project in the village. The previous video was uploaded a month ago, so I apologize for that. Creating a video takes a lot of time, at least a day. So I've decided I would focus on developing the game itself. So my video diary will be less often. Well, now for the work done. I mainly focused on 2 big mechanics: world traveling and fighting.
Traveling via the world map is a large and interesting layer of my project. I remind you that by building a special structure, the lighthouse, the player gets the opportunity to equip and send expeditions for exploration. The number of members in the expedition is initially limited to 2 people, but during the game, with the help of research, this number can be increased to 4. Which settlers to unite in a group for the trip is one of the interesting tasks for the player, because anything can happen during the trip, from combat clashes to solving various puzzles, which requires different skills and abilities of the characters. The player sets a destination for their expedition on the map. Arriving at such a point, the group explores the location. This is done in the form of short stories, where the player is given the opportunity to choose the desired action option, after which it is checked whether the group was able to perform the action chosen by the player. In case of success, the group receives resources, items, technologies, or new persons. But all this property still needs to be delivered to the settlement. It becomes available to the player only when the expedition returns. In case of failure, the members of the squad can be injured and even die. The speed of movement of the group directly depends on how endured the people in it are. Well, let's return to short stories. I made sure that when choosing an action option in adventures, the player had full information about the chance of success. When hovering over the action option, detailed information is displayed, which parameter and skills of the expedition member affects the probability of the final result. Thus, I continue to implement my philosophy that all game information should be open and transparent to the player. On the world map screen, the player has access to information about his groups, their composition, their inventory, their speed, and so on. I've been messing around with the story's mechanics for a long time. At first, I wanted to make a simple template, according to which I could grade several dozen similar events. But I decided not to limit myself to narrow boundaries, and in the end, I made the system very flexible, so that it would be possible to describe almost any interesting story to the player. Also, this approach forces me to write down each story manually, as separate script.
I was inspired for creating such little stories by wonderful board games by Ryan Luckett. They are Above and Below, Near and Far, and Sleeping Gods. There are wonderful family Euro strategies. Every player has little journeys. In that moment, another player takes such storybook and reads to first player a little story.
Now I'll need to roll a die to see which paragraph we're looking up. I rolled a 5, and that's paragraph 122. All right, it's Explorer story time.
Your party travels along a cobbled road in a vast windy cavern. Soon you come upon a man clothed in blue robes and a white fur hat.
Gandalf?
The main disadvantage of board game is its limits. This small box just can't contain a lot of content. The same for this storybook. It contains just 200 of little stories. In my computer project, I don't have such a limitation. I can make a lot of stories, and each story can be big, and conditions for making decision may be more various. For successful paths, I can count not only characters' traits, but also their skills, their stats, inventory of expedition, and a lot of other parameters, which just cannot be counted in the board game.
In general, points of interest on the world map are the main source for obtaining new settlers for the settlement. I remind you that in my project the time of one mission is about several dozen days, so in such a short time the settlers do not have time to give birth to children and reproduce. and the existing character can die. So where to get new ones for work and resource extraction? That's right, meeting travels and invite to the settlement.
Also, these little stories will serve as plot drivers. The game will give the player the plot in small chunks when his expedition group arrives to a certain point on the map. The second big mechanic I worked on was tower defense or settlement defense. I thought I would do it quickly and move on, but it turned out to be more work than I expected. I didn't make yet any complex big fighting mechanics like in strategies, so I don't have a blank. There are a lot of assets in Unity Asset Store, and some of them are very good, but I used to write all the mechanics in my projects by myself. So I've decided to spend as much time as I need to implement a flexible and modular fighting system that I will be able to use not just in this project, but in all my future projects.
I started by reworking the character inventory. Now each resident of the settlement has 6 slots for items: headdress, amulet, ring, shoes, cloak, weapon. Accordingly, all items in the game are conventionally divided into these 6 types. Visually, only the headdress and weapon are visible on the character. Weapons, in turn, are divided into 3 classic subtypes: melee, ranged, and magic. So far, I haven't made a separate window with the classic image of the hero's body and slots for items, as is usually done in RPG games, but I've left the list of items visually small in the character window to emphasize that the settler's equipment is only a secondary mechanic, and that the player shouldn't spend too much time messing around with the equipment of each individual character, but should quickly distribute the available items to more or less suitable people, because he is in charge of the entire settlement, and there are a lot of other things to pay attention to.
I've made some items manually. They are started items, started weapon. For other, I made an item generator, which randomly grades a bunch of items.
I decided that it would be easier to maintain balance in the game if there wasn't a big difference between the best item in the game and the worst. Therefore, approximately a first level weapon has damage of about 10, a second level weapon has 20, and the third level weapon has 30. Such a small discrepancy in stats will prevent first level item from becoming useless over time, and I remind you that according to the game design in my project, under the leadership of the player, there will be a very small settlement for about 30 or 40 people, but it will be not possible to dress each character completely. Each character will receive 1 or 2 items at best. In addition, I had to write from scratch not only the items themselves, but also such basic scripts for combat mechanics that we usually simply do not pay attention to. The character's ability to search for his target, approach it closer, move away from it in case of danger, attack, and so on. The settlement defense itself currently looks like this. It's made in the style of an unobtrusive tower defense. This is when monsters don't attack but simply line up and after another, and the player needs to keep them from passing through. When the mobs reach the main structure in the center of the village, they damage it. If too many mobs are missed, the structure explodes and the player loses. To stop the flow of enemies, you need to set up guard posts to which you assign characters for protection. The character at such post stands still and doesn't move, but only attacks enemies running past. In principle, this is almost classic tower defense, although usually in tower defenses characters are not used for protection, but some towers, cannons, equipments, traps.
But I went further and implemented in my project the thing I have long wanted to be in all tower defenses games. And to be honest, I'm a big fan of tower defenses, since their heydays in custom maps of Warcraft 3 and StarCraft.
So, a character at the post can be given a priority of targets to attack: the closest, slowest, lower HP, or conversely the strongest enemies. This adds a strategy depth to our defense, allowing the player to plan the placement of their heroes in such a way as to destroy the flow of monsters as efficiently as possible with the fewest characters. Here's an example. Put a settler with a staff with a frostball spell at the beginning and give him the priority of the fastest enemy. Then he won't just be killing the same monster, but will slow everyone down a little bit, simply slowing down the entire flow. Behind him you can put a character with the strongest but slowest weapon and give him the priority of monsters with the most health. His task will be to inflict as much damage as possible but not waste time finishing off enemies, and at the end put a fast archer who will finish off the slowest and heavily damaged mobs that run towards him.
It remains to make few dozens of interesting enemies and their combinations in ways to great interesting task for the player. Besides the two big layers of work, I've been making a lot of small improvements in my projects here and there.
I started using temporary free assets for character portraits, weapons, and primitive hastily made building models to make it a little easier for me to test the game and for you as viewers to understand what is happening on the screen. I made it possible to chop down trees, getting wood and clearing the area for future structures. I made a few new buildings: a graveyard where dead settlers rest, and shaman hut, where the shaman can perform a ritual and bring one dead person back to life every 3 days. I made a character editing screen, which a player in Sandbox mode may need when he wants to populate the settlement with his own designed characters. I also pulled in a few hundred random fantasy names from this site, and a lot of other small edits that there's no point in talking about.
Well, in general, the work on my project deepened, and the project itself grew and became massive. At the beginning of development, I could show new interesting things almost every day. New pieces of interface, new small mechanics. But now, I'm digging several days in my scripts and nothing changes visually in project. There's nothing to show you. I've never made before such a big project with such a lot of scripts and mechanics. Well, my video reports about development will be uploaded more rarely. But I'm here, I'm sitting and working on my dream project. If you want to see the end of this story, subscribe and keep waiting for the game release. Have a good time, friends! The main disadvantage of board game is its limits.